The blue light from the dual monitors burned into Sophia Bennett's retinas, a sharp contrast to the luxurious shadows of the executive suite. It was 2:00 a.m., and the silence of the Coal Enterprises building was absolute, save for the rhythmic hum of the air conditioning and the frantic clicking of her mouse. Sophia wasn't just Adrian Cole's fiancée. She was his lead accountant, the invisible backbone of his rising empire. She lived for the logic of numbers, the way they never lied, and the way they always settled into a perfect, undeniable balance. But tonight, the balance was gone. Her eyes narrowed as she stared at a line item that felt like a glitch in reality. $2 million had been wired to an entity called Belmont Holdings 3 days ago. There was no corresponding invoice, no contract, and no record of Belmont Holdings in their vendor database. Sophia chewed her lower lip, her fingers flying across the keyboard to trace the digital breadcrumbs. The more she dug, the colder she felt. The money hadn't gone to a supplier. It had vanished into a series of offshore accounts that led to a dead end. The heavy mahogany door creaked open, and the scent of expensive sandalwood and aged bourbon drifted in. Sophia didn't need to look up to know it was Adrian. She felt his presence like a weight, a familiar pressure that usually felt like safety but tonight felt like a suffocating shroud. Still at it, soft? His voice was smooth, a velvet baritone that had once made her heart skip a beat. Now, it just made her shoulders tense. He walked behind her, his large hands settling on her shoulders. He squeezed, his thumbs digging into her muscles with a force that was just a fraction too hard to be considered a massage. Fiancé. He walked behind her, his large hands settling on her shoulders. You're going to get wrinkles if you keep scowling at the screen like that. And God knows, we need to keep you looking your best for the gala next week. Sophia pulled away slightly, turning her chair to face him. Adrian looked every bit the Billionaire CEO, his silk shirt perfectly tailored, his dark hair artfully tousled. He looked at her with a patronizing sort of affection, the kind one might reserve for a particularly diligent pet. Adrian, I found a discrepancy. A big one. Who is Belmont Holdings? You authorized a $2 million transfer to them without a voucher. Adrian's expression didn't flicker. He let out a soft, dismissive chuckle and reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Oh, Soph, this is why I love you, but it's also why you're so exhausted all the time. You see a ghost in every shadow. Belmont is a private investment firm. It's a surprise, actually, a diversified portfolio for our future. You weren't supposed to see that yet. An investment firm with no physical address and a routing number in the Cayman Islands. Sophia asked, her voice trembling slightly. Adrian, the books don't support this. We're over-leveraged as it is. If the board sees this, the board won't see anything because my brilliant fiancé is going to make sure the books look perfect. Adrian interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. Don't be difficult, Sophia. You've been sounding so hysterical lately. Maybe it's that dress. Or maybe it's that dress you're wearing. It's a bit tight, isn't it? I told you that new diet would be good for you. You have such a pretty face, it's a shame to let yourself go. The comment hit its mark. Sophia felt the familiar sting of insecurity, the old habit of shrinking herself to fit his expectations. You have such a pretty face. Adrian had spent 3 years subtly chipping away at her confidence, reminding her that she was lucky a man of his stature wanted a woman who wasn't a size 0. So, sure. He made her feel like her intelligence was a tool for his use, while her body was a project he was failing to fix. Tell me that here isn't that good. I'm not being hysterical, she whispered, though her resolve was wavering. I'm being an accountant. You're being my wife-to-be, he corrected, straightening his tie. And as your future husband, I'm telling you to let it go. Delete the query, balance the ledger against the marketing budget, and come to bed. You're starting to look haggard, and I have a reputation to maintain. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door, his silhouette tall and imposing against the hallway light. I do everything for us, Sophia. Remember that? Everything. He closed the door, leaving her in the dim glow of the monitors. Sophia stared at the screen, the $2 million figure staring back at her like an accusation. She knew she should do as he said. She usually did. It was easier to believe his lies than to face the possibility that the man she loved was a stranger. She reached for the mouse to close the file, but her hand stopped. Her intuition, the one thing Adrian hadn't been able to fully suppress, was screaming. She didn't delete the query. Instead, she encrypted the file and sent a copy to a private, hidden cloud drive she had set up years ago. Just as she finished, Adrian's cell phone, which he had left charging on the corner of her desk, began to vibrate. It was a burner phone, a cheap, plastic thing that looked out of place in this high-tech office. Sophia hesitated, then glanced at the door. Adrian was in the private bathroom down the hall. She could hear the water running. She picked up the phone. The screen showed no name, just a string of zeros. She swiped the screen. She didn't say anything. She just listened. Cole, a voice rasped on the other end. It wasn't the voice of a businessman. It was a voice that sounded like gravel grinding against bone, cold and devoid of any human warmth. The interest is compounding. Morty doesn't like to wait. You said the payment would be ready by the end of the week. The boss's condition is worsening. He wants his pound of flesh before he rots through. Sophia's breath hitched. She felt a cold dread wash over her, a sensation like ice water being poured down her spine. Sal Morty. Sal, the name was whispered in Chicago like a curse. Dante Morty, the rotting king of the Chicago underworld. Rumors said he was a monster, a man so plagued by a horrific, decaying disease that he hid in a fortress-like mansion, ruling with a cruelty born of his own agony. Who is this? Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. There was a sharp silence on the other end. Then, the voice changed, becoming even more menacing. Tell Adrian that if the debt isn't settled, we won't just take his company. We'll take everything he's ever touched. He has 48 hours to deliver the asset. Don't be late. The line went dead. Sophia stared at the black screen of the burner phone, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. So asset? Payment, Morty? So she looked back at the $2 million transfer. It wasn't an investment. It was a drop in the bucket of a debt she hadn't known existed. The bathroom door opened, and Adrian walked back in, wiping his hands on a towel. He saw her holding the burner phone, and for a split second, his mask of perfection shattered. His face went pale, his eyes widening with a raw, primal fear she had never seen before. He lunged forward, snatching the phone from her hand so violently that her chair spun backward. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his voice trembling. "Who told you to touch this?" "Adrian." "Who was that?" Sophia asked, her voice shaking. "Who is Morty? What debt were they talking about? What asset do you have to deliver?" Adrian stared at her, his chest heaving. The arrogant, controlling CEO was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he was standing on the edge of a gallows. He looked at the phone, then back at Sophia, and slowly, a terrifyingly calm expression settled over his features. It was a look of calculation, the way a man looks at a piece of property he's about to sell. "It's nothing you need to worry about, Sophia," he said, his voice eerily steady. He walked over to her, leaning down and gripping the arms of her chair, pinning her in place. He didn't look at her with love. He didn't even look at her with the usual condescension. He looked at her as if she were a line item on a ledger that finally, mercifully, balanced out. "Everything is going to be fine. I've just realized how to settle my accounts. You've always wanted to be useful to the company, haven't you, darling?" Sophia tried to push past him, but his grip was like iron. The dread in her stomach solidified into a hard, cold lump. She realized then that the perfect life she had been building with Adrian wasn't just a facade, it was a cage. And the door was about to be locked from the outside. "Adrian, you're scaring me. Let me go." "I'm saving us, Sophia," he whispered, a twisted smile touching his lips. "I'm making a trade, and you're the most valuable thing I own." As he spoke, the burner phone buzzed again in his hand, a single text message lighting up the screen. Sophia caught a glimpse of it before he pulled away. "Sal, the boss is waiting. Bring the girl." So, the silence that followed Adrian's words was heavy, suffocating, and tasted of iron. Sophia felt the air leave her lungs as if he had physically struck her. She looked at the man she had promised to marry, the man whose shirts she ironed and whose secrets she kept, and realized she was looking at a stranger. The most valuable thing he owned, not the woman he loved. Not his partner. An asset, a piece of collateral to be traded across a green felt table to settle a debt he had hidden from her. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. A trade? She whispered, her voice cracking. Adrian, I am a human being. I am your fiancé. What are you talking about? Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, he let out a long, ragged sigh and slumped into the leather chair behind his mahogany desk, burying his face in his hands. It was a calculated move, a performance of a man at his breaking point. You think I want this, Sophia? You think I haven't tried everything else? I've been drowning for months. The $2 million you saw in the books? That was just the interest, just the tip of the iceberg. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his face a mask of simulated agony. I owe Dante Morti $12 million. $12 million, Sophia. Money I don't have. Money the company doesn't have. If I don't pay by tomorrow morning, they won't just take the business, they'll take my life. And they'll come for you too, and your parents. Do you want to see your mother's house burned to the ground because of my mistakes? The mention of her mother made Sophia's stomach churn. Adrian knew exactly which buttons to press. He knew her sense of duty was her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. Dante Morti. She repeated the name, a chill running down her spine. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. The Morti family was the shadow that governed the city, and Dante was the king of that shadow. But the rumors about him had changed in the last year. They were no longer about his ruthless business acquisitions or his tactical brilliance. They were whispers of horror. They say he's sick, Sophia said, her voice barely audible. Adrian nodded grimly, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. He's more than sick. They say he's rotting alive. Some rare, necrotic disease that the doctors can't name. He's a recluse now, hidden away in that fortress of a mansion, waiting for the end. He's a monster, Sophia. A dying, bitter monster who wants company in his final days. He doesn't want the money anymore. He wants a distraction, someone to be there until the light goes out. He reached across the desk, grabbing her hands. His skin felt cold, slimy. It's only for a few months, maybe weeks. Once he's gone, the debt is wiped clean. You'll be free. We'll be free. I can get the business back on track, and we can finally have the life we planned. Sophia pulled her hands away, a wave of nausea washing over her. You want me to go live with a dying man? A mafia boss who is rotting alive. You're selling me to a ghost, Adrian. Her voice rose in pitch, hysteria bubbling just beneath the surface. Adrian's expression shifted instantly. The full vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cold, sharp edge of the man who had spent years chipping away at her self-esteem. He stood up, towering over her, his eyes narrowing. And who else is going to save us, Sophia? Look at yourself. You're a brilliant accountant, yes, but you're hardly the girl every man in this city is clawing to get to. You're plus-sized. You're plain, and you're lucky I even looked your way in the first place. You should be grateful that your usefulness to me finally extends beyond balancing a ledger. This is the only way you can prove you actually love me. The cruelty of his words was like a physical weight, pushing her down. For 4 years, he had whispered these things to her in the dark, that she was lucky to have him, that no one else would appreciate her unique look, that her value was tied entirely to what she could do for him. He had spent years grooming her to accept this moment, to believe that her only worth was as a sacrifice. I won't do it, she breathed, though her resolve felt like sand slipping through her fingers. I'll go to the police. I'll tell them about the money, about Belmont Holdings. Adrian laughed, a sharp, barking sound that had no humor in it. The police? You think Morty doesn't own the police? You go to them, and you'll be dead before you reach the front steps. And so will I. Is that what you want? You want our blood on your hands because you're too selfish to spend a few weeks in a mansion. He stepped closer, his voice softening into that toxic, manipulative purr that had kept her trapped for so long. Think of it as an assignment, Sophia. You're so good with numbers. Go there, keep his books, be the companion he needs, and when he dies, you come home a hero. I'll be waiting for you. I'll marry you the day you walk out of that house. We'll have the wedding of your dreams. Just do this one thing for me. For us. We'll have the wedding of your dreams. Just do this one thing for me. For us, he touched her cheek. And for the first time in her life, Sophia felt a genuine urge to scream. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but greed and a desperate, cowardly hunger for survival. He didn't love her. He never had. She was just another column in his book of assets, and he was liquidating her to cover his losses. Under the crushing weight of his manipulation and the very real fear for her family's safety, Sophia felt her spirit break. She nodded slowly, a single tear tracking through the makeup Adrian had told her was too thick earlier that evening. Fine, she whispered. I'll go. Adrian's face lit up with a triumphant, sickening glow. That's my girl. I knew you'd see reason. Pack a small bag. Only the essentials. Morty's people will be here in an hour. He kissed her forehead a dry, lifeless gesture and hurried back to his phone, already dismissing her as if she were a task already completed. Sophia turned and walked out of the office, her legs feeling like lead. She went to their shared bedroom, the room that was supposed to be her sanctuary, and began to pack. Her hands shook as she folded a few sweaters and grabbed her laptop. She felt like she was packing her own shroud. As she reached for her toiletry bag, she heard Adrian's voice through the partially open door of his study. He was on the phone again. His voice was different now, low, excited, and stripped of the grieving fiancé act. Sophia froze, her heart stopping in her chest. She crept toward the door, her breath hitching as she listened. Yeah, it's done, Adrian was saying, his tone light, almost celebratory. She's coming, the trade is set. Morty's doctors say he's got 2 months tops. The internal organs are already failing. Once he kicks the bucket, the debt is erased, and I get the Belmont accounts back in full. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Adrian chuckled, a sound that made Sophia's skin crawl. Of course I don't care what happens to her in there. Let the rotting boss have his fun. By the time he's dead, I'll have already restructured the firm. I'm just waiting for a dead man's shoes, and Sophia is the key to the closet. Once Morty is gone, none of this will matter. She'll be so traumatized, she'll do whatever I say, or I'll just cut her loose. Either way, I win. Sophia leaned against the hallway wall, the world spinning around her. He wasn't just trading her to save his life. He was trading her as a calculated investment, waiting for Dante Morty to die, so he could swoop in and profit from the vacuum of power. He was using her body and her life as a bridge to a fortune. The grief she had felt moments ago vanished, replaced by a white-hot, searing spark of rage. It was a small spark, buried deep beneath years of insecurity and emotional abuse. But it was there. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had managed millions of dollars for a man who didn't deserve a cent of her brilliance. She wasn't a plus-sized accountant to be discarded. She was the one who knew where every dollar was hidden. She was the one who understood the language of power better than Adrian ever would. The front doorbell rang, a heavy, ominous sound that echoed through the silent apartment. Sophia grabbed her bag, her eyes hard and dry. She walked back into the living room where Adrian was waiting, a practiced look of sorrow back on his face. They're here, darling, he said, reaching for her bag. Are you ready? Sophia didn't let him take the bag. She gripped the handle tight, looking him straight in the eye with a coldness that seemed to startle him. I'm ready, Adrian, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She walked past him toward the door, where 2 men in charcoal suits stood like statues. They didn't look like thugs. They looked like soldiers. One of them stepped forward, his eyes scanning her with a clinical indifference. Miss Bennet, Mr. Morty is expecting you. Sophia didn't look back at Adrian. She didn't want to see his fake tears or his hidden smile. She stepped out into the hallway, the elevator doors sliding open like the jaws of a beast. As she descended toward the black sedan waiting at the curb, a single thought echoed in her mind. So Adrian thinks he sent me to a grave. But if I'm going to be in the house of a monster, I might as well learn how to bite. So the car door opened, and as she slid into the leather interior, the scent of expensive ozone and something metallic filled her senses. The driver didn't say a word as he pulled away from the curb, leaving her old life behind. Sophia watched the lights of the city flicker by, wondering if the rotting boss was truly the monster she should be afraid of, or if the real monster was the man who had just sold her for $12 million. As the car turned toward the outskirts of the city, toward the looming silhouette of the Morty estate, Sophia saw a flash of a dark, Gothic mansion on a hill. It looked less like a home and more like a tomb. She clutched her bag to her chest, her heart racing as the iron gates groaned open. She was about to meet the man who was rotting alive, and for the first time in her life, she realized she had absolutely nothing left to lose. The iron gates of the Morty estate didn't just open, they groaned like an ancient beast, disturbed from its slumber. As the black sedan wound its way up the serpentine driveway, Sophia felt the world she knew, the world of balance sheets, office coffee, and Adrian's manipulative smiles recede into a foggy distance. The mansion loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette of Gothic architecture against a bruised purple sky. It was a fortress of stone and secrets, its windows flickering with amber light that suggested life, but offered no warmth. Sophia's hand trembled as she reached into her purse, her fingers brushing against the silk handkerchief she had doused in lavender oil before leaving. The rumors about Dante Morti were a toxic cloud over the city's elite. They called him the rotting boss, whispers suggesting that a rare, degenerative disease was eating him alive, turning his flesh to ash while his heart still beat. They said the stench of decay followed him like a shadow, a physical manifestation of the darkness in his soul. She pressed the cloth to her nose, the scent of lavender sharp and medicinal, a thin barrier between her and the horror she was sure awaited her inside. The car came to a smooth, silent halt. The guard, a man with a jaw like granite and eyes that had seen too much, opened her door. He didn't offer a hand. He simply waited. Sophia stepped out, the heels of her shoes clicking sharply on the damp cobblestones. The air was cold, smelling of pine and rain, but as she approached the massive oak front doors, she braced herself. She expected the sickly sweet scent of gangrene, the heavy air of a sick room, the oppressive atmosphere of a mausoleum. Instead, when the door swung inward, she was greeted by the crisp, sterile scent of expensive wax, old books, and something sharp, like ozone before a storm. The foyer was cavernous, floor-to-ceiling marble reflecting the glow of a massive crystal chandelier that hung like a frozen explosion of light. There was no dust, no filth, no smell of death. This way, miss smell of death. This way, miss smell of reflecting the glow of a massive crystal chandelier that hung massive crystal chandelier, valve reflecting the glow of a massive crystal chandelier. Bennett, the guard muttered, his voice echoing in the vast space. Sophia followed him, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. They passed through a long hallway lined with portraits of grim-faced men, the ancestors of the Morty bloodline, their eyes following her with judgment. Finally, they reached a set of double doors at the end of the gallery. The guard knocked once, a sharp, authoritative sound, and then pulled the doors open, stepping aside to let her pass. Sophia took a deep breath through her lavender-soaked silk, squared her shoulders, and walked into the lion's den. The room was a library, vast and shadow-drenched, with walls of dark mahogany books rising into the gloom. At the far end, behind a desk carved from a single slab of obsidian, sat a man. He wasn't in a hospital bed. He wasn't hooked up to machines. He was sitting upright, a silhouette of raw, intimidating power. The light from a single desk lamp hit the lower half of his face, revealing a jawline so sharp it looked lethal. As Sophia approached, her footsteps faltering, the man looked up. His eyes were the color of a winter sea, cold, turbulent, and terrifyingly intelligent. This was Dante Morti. He was strikingly handsome, but as he moved his hand into the light to close a heavy ledger, Sophia saw it. A dark, mottled patch of skin stretched across his knuckles and disappeared up his sleeve. A deep, bruised purple that looked like a stain on his very existence. "You're holding that cloth to your face as if I've already started to decompose, miss." Bennett, a voice rumbled, deep and resonant, vibrating in Sophia's chest. It wasn't the voice of a dying man, it was the voice of a king. Sophia froze, her hand dropping instinctively. She realized with a flush of embarrassment that the room was perfectly fresh. Zumbrun. Dante Morte leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. If you're expecting a smell, you're going to be disappointed. I'm not quite a corpse yet. Sophia swallowed hard, her throat dry. I didn't mean to be disrespectful, Mr. Morty, I was told. You were told I was rotting alive. Dante interrupted, his gaze raking over her with a clinical, detached interest. He didn't look at her with the disdain Adrian usually did. He looked at her as if she were a puzzle he hadn't asked to solve. And your fiancé, the ever so resourceful Adrian Cole, thought a sacrificial lamb would appease the beast. Tell me, do you always do what you're told, or is this a special occasion? The bite in his tone stung. Sophia felt a flicker of her usual professional steel rise through the fear. I am here because a debt was owed. Adrian said you required a companion to settle the $12 million. Dante's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He stood up, and Sophia was struck by his height. He was a mountain of a man, dressed in a bespoke black suit that hid whatever other marks the rot had claimed. He walked around the desk, his movements fluid and predatory, though she noticed a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his right hand. He stopped just inches from her, his presence overwhelming. He smelled of sandalwood and expensive tobacco, a scent so masculine and alive that it made her head spin. He looked down at her, his gaze lingering on her face, then traveling slowly down her curves Adrian had spent years telling her were a flaw, a sign of lack of discipline. Dante's eyes weren't judgmental, they were curious. A companion? Dante repeated, the word sounding like a mockery. He let out a low, dry laugh that sent shivers down her spine. Is that what he told you? That I needed someone to hold my hand while I faded away? He reached out, his fingers hovering just an inch from her chin. Not touching, but she could feel the heat radiating from him. Let me be very clear, Miss Bennett. I didn't ask for a woman. I didn't ask for a nurse, and I certainly didn't ask for a companion. I asked for my $12 million, in cash by midnight tonight. Sophia's heart stopped. What? What? She whispered, the color draining from her face. But Adrian, he said the deal was struck. He said my presence here would clear the ledger. He said you agreed. Dante's hand dropped. A look of cold, dark amusement crossed his features. Then Adrian Cole is a bigger fool than I imagined. Or perhaps he's just a better liar. I don't trade in flesh, Sophia. I trade in power. And your fiancé has neither the money to pay me nor the courage to face me. He turned away, walking toward a large window that overlooked the darkened grounds. He didn't trade you to settle a debt. He dumped you here to buy himself 24 hours of head start before my men find him and gut him. The world tilted on its axis. Sophia felt the floor beneath her feet turn to water. All the guilt Adrian had heaped on her. All the sacrifices he claimed he was making for their future. All the tears he'd shed as he packed her bag, it was all a distraction. He hadn't saved her. He had discarded her like a piece of unwanted luggage to slow down the pursuer. She wasn't a payment. She was a decoy. He lied. She breathed, the realization hitting her like a physical blow to the stomach. He left me here to die with you. Dante turned back to her, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. The dark patches on his neck were visible now, creeping up toward his jawline, a stark contrast to his pale, aristocratic skin. He looked at her, seeing the shattered remnants of her world in her eyes. For a moment, the coldness in his gaze softened into something that looked dangerously like pity. He left you here with a man who has nothing to lose, Dante said softly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, which makes me the most dangerous person in this city. But you have a choice, Sophia. I have a car waiting. I can have you driven to the airport, or back to that empty apartment. You owe me nothing, because you are worth nothing to the debt he owes. Sophia looked at the door, then back at the man who was supposed to be a monster. She thought of Adrian, probably already halfway to a hidden offshore account, laughing at how easily he'd fooled the brilliant accountant. She thought of her life, a life of being told she wasn't enough, that she was lucky to have a man like Adrian. And then she looked at Dante Morty, a man who was rotting but stood taller than anyone she'd ever known. "No," Sophia said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. She gripped her bag, her mind already racing through the numbers she had seen in Adrian's hidden files, the $2 million transfer to Belmont Holdings, the irregularities she hadn't had time to trace. "I'm not going back. Adrian didn't just steal your money, Mr. Morty. He's been stealing from me too. My life, my career, my dignity." She took a step toward him, crossing the invisible line of his personal space. "You say you want your 12 million? I'm the only one who knows where he's hidden it. And I think I know why you're really rotting." Dante froze, his eyes locking onto hers with a sudden, lethal intensity. "Careful, Sophia, you're playing a game you don't understand." "I understand numbers," she countered, her heart hammering. "And the numbers in your medicine cabinet don't add up." "So, harrowing, don't add up." As she spoke, Dante's hand flew to his chest, a sudden, violent spasm racking his frame. He gasped, his face contorting in agony as he reached for a small amber bottle on his desk. As she spoke, the amber bottle on his desk. His fingers fumbled, the bottle skittering across the obsidian surface and rolling toward the edge. Sophia lunged forward, catching it just before it hit the floor. She looked at the label, then at the man collapsing into his chair, his skin graying before her very eyes. This wasn't a disease. It was a calculation. And she was the only one who knew the formula. The small amber bottle felt unnervingly heavy in Sophia's palm, the plastic warm from the friction of her frantic catch. Inside, the white capsules rattled like teeth. She didn't hand them back immediately. Instead, her eyes darted to the label, her breath hitching as she read the manufacturer's name printed in tiny, clinical font at the bottom. "So distributed by Belmont Holdings." So the very name she had found buried in Adrian's encrypted ledgers. And so read Adrian's encrypted ledgers. The company that had received a $2 million consultancy fee from her fiancé's accounts just last month. Her heart did a slow, painful roll in her chest. This wasn't just a business debt. This was a web, and she was the fly that had finally seen the spider. Dante Morty let out a low, guttural groan, his large frame slumped against the high back of his leather chair. His hand, the skin mottled with those terrifying, dark gray patches that looked like bruised shadows beneath the surface, reached out with a tremor he couldn't hide. Give them to me," he wheezed, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering over pavement. "Now, Sophia," she looked from the bottle to the man, into the light of the study, surrounded by the scent of old leather and the faint, metallic tang of something she couldn't name. Dante looked less like a monster and more like a fallen king. Even in his agony, there was a dignity to him that Adrian had never possessed. Adrian was all polished surfaces and hollow promises. Dante was a crumbling fortress, but the foundation was still made of stone. "This medicine," Sophia whispered, her fingers tightening around the bottle. "How long have you been taking it?" "Since the symptoms started," Dante managed to say, his eyes hooded, his jaw clenched so tight she feared his teeth might crack. 6 months, it's the only thing that stops the seizures. Give it to me, or I'll have Marco drag you out of here myself." Sophia stepped back, shaking her head, the accountant in her, the woman who lived for the logic of spreadsheets and the absolute truth of a balanced ledger, was screaming. "It's not stopping anything, Mr. Morty. Look at your hand. You just told me you're rotting. If the medicine worked, you wouldn't be dying. You're a man who understands leverage. Why would you keep paying for a product that is failing to deliver results?" Dante's eyes snapped open, a flash of the legendary Morty fire piercing through the haze of pain. He lunged forward, his movement surprisingly fast despite his state, and snatched the bottle from her hand. He didn't wait for water. He flipped the cap and shook 2 pills into his palm, swallowing them dry with a violent convulsion of his throat. He leaned back, his eyes closing as he waited for the relief to come. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The grand clock on the mantel ticked away the seconds, sounding like a countdown. After a few minutes, the tension in Dante's shoulders seemed to ease, though his breathing remained shallow. He opened his eyes, the lethal intensity returning, though dimmed by exhaustion. "You have a sharp tongue for a woman who was just traded like a piece of livestock," Dante said, his voice regaining some of its gravelly power. He gestured toward the door with a dismissive wave of his scarred hand. "I am a man of my word. Even if your fiancé is a snake, I told you that you are free. My driver is waiting at the gate. He will take you wherever you want to go. The airport, a hotel, back to that empty penthouse you shared with a man who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. I'll even have a courier deliver a sum of money to tide you over. Son, consider it a gift for not screaming when you saw my face." Sophia looked at the door. Freedom, it was right there, just a few hundred yards past the mahogany doors and the iron gates of the Morty estate. She could go back to her life. But as the thought formed, she realized with a sickening jolt that there was no life to go back to. Adrian had spent years eroding her confidence, telling her that her brilliance with numbers was cute, making her feel that her curves were something to be hidden, and convincing her that without him, she was nothing but a girl from a family with a tarnished name. If she went back, he would find another way to use her. He had already proven he was willing to let her watch a man die, or perhaps he had sent her here to be the witness to a murder he was facilitating. "If I leave," Sophia said, her voice steadying, "Adrian wins. He gets to keep the 12 million he stole from you. And he gets to keep the money he's funneling through Belmont Holdings. He thinks I'm a coward. He thinks I'm so desperate for his love that I'll eventually crawl back and apologize for him selling me." Dante watched her, his gaze calculating. "And what do you think you are?" Sophia straightened her spine, ignoring the way her conservative blouse felt tight against her chest, a blouse Adrian had picked out because he said it made her look less distracting. "I think I'm the person who is going to find your money. And I think I'm the only person in this house who realizes that you aren't sick, Mr. Morty. You're being erased." A dark, cynical laugh bubbled up in Dante's chest. "Erased? I've seen the best specialists in the country. They call it a rare degenerative condition, necrosis of the dermal layers and systemic organ failure. My own doctor, a man who has served my family for 20 years, says it's a miracle I'm still standing." "Is that the same doctor who prescribes those pills?" Sophia asked, pointing to the amber bottle. "The ones distributed by a shell company owned by my fiancé." Dante's expression shifted. The cynicism didn't vanish, but a flicker of doubt crossed his features, quickly masked by a cold, hard mask of iron. He looked down at his hand, where the dark patches seemed to be pulsing. "You're suggesting a conspiracy that would require my inner circle to be compromised. My guards, my doctors, my business partners. You think they're all in league with a mid-level rat, like Adrian Cole?" "I think Adrian is the bagman," Sophia countered, stepping closer to the desk, her fear being eclipsed by the thrill of the hunt. "He's the one moving the money because he's safe. No one suspects the boring accountant with the pretty fiancée. He's the perfect middleman, but he's greedy and he's sloppy. He left a trail in the Belmont accounts. A trail that leads right to this house." Dante leaned forward, the shadows of the room dancing in the hollows of his cheeks. He looked like a specter of death, but his eyes were vibrantly, dangerously alive. "And why tell me? Why stay in the house of a monster to help him? You could take my money and run to a country where Adrian can never find you." "Because I'm tired of being an asset on someone else's balance sheet," Sophia said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce hum. "I want to be the one who balances the books. And right now the debt Adrian owes is to both of us. Let me stay. Not as a companion, not as a payment. Let me stay as your accountant. I'll find your money, and in exchange, you give me the protection I need to take everything from him." Dante stared at her for a long time, the silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. He looked at her not as the plus-sized woman Adrian had tried to shame, but as a weapon. A smile, sharp, cruel, and strangely beautiful, tugged at the corners of his lips. "You have fire, Sophia Bennett. It would be a shame to let it go to waste." He reached for the medicine bottle again, his hand shaking more violently than before. "Fine, you stay, but if you're wrong, if you're just another spy sent to finish the job, I will make sure the rotting version of me is the last thing you ever see. He flipped the cap again, intending to take another dose to ward off the returning tremors. But as he tipped the bottle, Sophia's eyes widened. She watched as he swallowed the pill, and almost instantly, the reaction began. It wasn't the slow relief of medicine. Dante's eyes blew wide, the pupils shrinking to pinpricks. A low, agonizing growl tore from his throat as he gripped the edges of the obsidian desk so hard the stone seemed to groan. Before Sophia's horrified eyes, the dark, necrotic patches on his neck and hands didn't just pulse, they spread. The gray deepened into a bruised, sickly purple crawling up his throat like ink spilled on parchment. His veins turned black, standing out in stark relief against his pale skin. "Dante!" Sophia cried out, reaching for him. He let out a choked gasp, his body stiffening as if struck by lightning. He looked at her, his vision blurring, the strength leaving his limbs as he began to slide from the chair. The medicine wasn't a cure. It was a catalyst. And as he hit the floor with a bone-jarring thought, Sophia realized the clock wasn't just ticking for his empire, it was ticking for his life. And the poison was working faster than she had ever imagined. The silence that followed Dante's collapse was deafening, broken only by the ragged, wet sound of his breathing. Sophia didn't scream. Her training as an accountant, a world of cold hard facts and high-pressure deadlines kicked in. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his chest. His skin felt unnaturally hot, yet he was shivering. The dark, ink-like stains on his neck seemed to pulse with a life of their own, a grotesque map of a war happening inside his veins. "Dante, stay with me," she hissed, her voice trembling but firm. She didn't call for the guards yet. If her suspicion was right, the people surrounding him were the ones holding the knife. She grabbed a glass of water from his desk and splashed it on his face. The shock made him gasp, his eyes snapping open, bloodshot and unfocused. He choked out a cough, a dark, metallic-smelling fluid staining his lips. "The pills," he wheezed, his hand clawing at the air. "No more pills," Sophia commanded, grabbing the amber bottle and shoving it into her pocket. "You're not sick, Dante. You're being erased." It took 20 minutes of agonizing struggle to get him back into his chair. Dante was a large man, a mountain of muscle even in his weakened state, and Sophia used every ounce of her strength to steady him. As the immediate seizure passed, the dark patches began to recede slightly, though they remained a haunting shade of charcoal against his skin. He leaned back, his head lolling against the leather, staring at Sophia with a mixture of exhaustion and newfound intensity. He looked at her not as a woman traded like a piece of livestock, but as the only person in the room who wasn't trying to bury him. "Why?" he rasped. "Why help me? You could have let me die and walked out with the keys to the garage." Sophia wiped the dark smudge from his lip with her sleeve, her expression hardening. "Because Adrian wants you dead. And anything that man wants, I've decided I'm going to take away from him. Besides," she added, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the computer screens on his desk, "you haven't paid me for my services yet. I don't work for free." By dawn, the atmosphere in the Morty mansion had shifted. Dante had regained enough strength to sit upright, though he looked like a ghost of the man who had terrified Chicago a year ago. He watched from the shadows of his wingback chair as Sophia took command of his desk. She had discarded her blazer, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied in a messy, practical bun. For hours, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic clicking of the mechanical keyboard and the soft rustle of paper. Dante found himself mesmerized by her. Adrian Cole had called her excess baggage, a woman who was lucky to be loved. But as Dante watched her eyes dart across complex spreadsheets, he saw a predator in her own right. She wasn't just looking at numbers, she was hunting. "Your internal security is a joke," Sophia said suddenly, her voice cutting through the gloom. She didn't look up from the monitor. "Your chief financial officer, a man named Lorenzo. He's been smoothing the edges of your construction contracts for 18 months. He thinks he's clever because he's using a shell company registered in the Caymans, but he's lazy. He's using the same IP address to log into his personal bank account as he does for the transfers." Dante's eyes sharpened, a flash of the old, lethal dawn returning. Lorenzo has been with my family for 20 years, he said, his voice a low growl. He's been more than a CFO. He's been a brother. Sophia finally looked at him, her gaze filled with a pity that stung more than any insult. Then your brother has stolen exactly $240,000 in the last quarter alone. And that's just the visible tip. Look here. She turned the monitor toward him, pointing to a series of microtransactions. These aren't just thefts. These are payments. They're disguised as equipment maintenance, but the frequency matches the delivery dates of your medication. Every time a new shipment of those pills arrives at your door, $20,000 leaves your account and ends up in a Belmont Holdings subsidiary. That's an assassin. Dante felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with his illness. Belmont Holdings, the company Adrian Cole had been funneling money into. The pieces were clicking into place with the sickening sound of a trap snapping shut. He looked at Sophia, really looked at her, seeing the brilliance that Adrian had tried so hard to dim. You found that in 4 hours? He asked, his voice thick with genuine respect. I found it because I knew where to look, she replied, leaning back and crossing her arms. Adrian is a creature of habit. He thinks women are too emotional to understand the complexities of high finance. He talked in front of me like I was a piece of furniture. He never realized I was auditing him every time he opened his mouth at dinner. Dante let out a dry, hacking laugh that turned into a grimace of pain. He reached out, his trembling fingers brushing the edge of the desk near her hand. My men, they see a dying man. They're already picking over my bones. But you see a map. He paused, his gaze intensifying. The guest suite on the 3rd floor. It has a view of the lake and a reinforced door. It's yours, you have total autonomy. No one enters without your permission, not even me. You'll have access to my private servers, my encrypted files, everything. Find the rest of the rot, Sophia. Tear it out by the roots. As the sun began to bleed over the Chicago skyline, painting the room in shades of bruised orange and gold, Dante stood up. He was unsteady, but there was a new fire in his eyes. He walked toward the door, but stopped, looking back at her. Adrian told me you were a burden he needed to shed. He told me you were a dull, unremarkable woman who would be grateful for the mercy of staying with me. He stepped closer, the shadows of the morning highlighting the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face. He is the biggest fool I have ever met. You aren't a payment, Sophia. You're the smartest person in this city. And once I'm standing on my own 2 feet again, I'm going to make sure he knows exactly what he threw away. Sophia felt a flush creep up her neck, not of shame, but of a strange, intoxicating power. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being tolerated, she was being valued. She watched him leave, his gait heavy but determined. She turned back to the screen, her fingers hovering over the keys. She had found the money, but as she delved deeper into the Belmont Holdings files, a specific entry caught her eye. It wasn't a financial transfer. It was a scanned document, a contract dated 3 years ago. Her breath hitched in her throat as she read the names on the bottom. It wasn't just Adrian and the corrupt doctor. There was a 3rd signature, one that made her blood run cold. The betrayal went far deeper than a debt or a jealous fiancé. It reached into the very heart of the Morty family. And as she clicked on the attached image file, a photo of a laboratory manifest appeared. Her eyes widened as she read the chemical composition of the medicine Dante had been taking. It wasn't just a slow poison. It was designed to be triggered by a specific external factor. She looked at the clock, then at the half-empty bottle of expensive scotch on Dante's desk. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the realization hit her like a physical blow. The poison wasn't finished with him yet, and the final trigger was something he encountered every single day. The realization felt like a dousing of ice water, chilling Sophia to her very marrow. Her eyes raced across the digital document, deciphering the complex chemical strings that most would find indecipherable. But to Sophia, who viewed the world in systems and balances, the data was a confession. The compound in the medicine wasn't a cure. It was a dormant catalyst. On its own, it caused mild lethargy, But when introduced to a specific enzyme, one found in high concentrations, in the very scotch Dante drank every evening to numb his pain, it transformed into a necrotic agent. It was a masterpiece of untraceable murder. They weren't just killing him, they were making him watch himself decay, ensuring that everyone, including Dante himself, believed he was dying of a natural, albeit horrific, disease. Her gaze shifted to the half-empty bottle of Macallan on the desk. The amber liquid caught the morning light, looking like liquid gold, but now it looked like venom. She looked at the third signature on the contract, the one that had made her blood run cold. It wasn't just Adrian's sloppy scrawl or Dr. Rosso's clinical script. It was a sharp, aggressive signature. Sal Lorenzo Morti, Sal Dante's own brother. The betrayal was a jagged blade twisted in the dark. Sophia didn't stop to think. She grabbed her tablet, the screen still glowing with the damning evidence, and bolted from the office. Her heels clicked sharply against the cold marble of the hallway, a frantic rhythm that echoed the pounding of her heart. She had spent years being the quiet one, the girl who blended into the wallpaper, while Adrian took up all the space in the room. But as she sprinted toward Dante's private quarters, that girl was gone. In her place was a woman who saw a ledger that didn't balance and was determined to fix the numbers. She reached the heavy oak doors of his suite and didn't bother knocking. She burst inside, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood and that faint, metallic tang she now knew wasn't rot, but the scent of a body fighting a losing battle against chemistry. Dante was standing by the window, his back to her. He had shed his suit jacket, and his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the dark, bruised-looking patches that climbed up his throat like ivy. In his right hand, he held a small crystal glass of scotch. In his left, he held the amber medicine bottle. He was seconds away from the ritual that was systematically destroying him. "Dante, stop!" Her voice cracked through the silence of the room, sharp and commanding. He froze, his shoulders tensing. He turned slowly, his expression a mask of weary irritation. "Sophia, I told you I needed rest. What part of leave me did you find difficult to calculate?" "Put the glass down," she breathed, stepping closer, her chest heaving. "And give me the bottle. Now." Dante let out a dry, humorless rasp of a laugh. He looked at the glass, then back at her, his obsidian eyes narrowed. "You've been in my house for less than 48 hours and you're already trying to dictate my schedule. I am in pain, Sophia. This mercy is all I have left." "It's not mercy. It's a death sentence." She crossed the room in 3 strides, ignoring the way he towered over her, ignoring the dangerous aura that usually kept men at a distance. She reached out, her fingers trembling but her grip firm, and snatched the crystal glass from his hand. Before he could react, she turned and threw it into the fireplace. The glass shattered, the expensive liquor hissing as it hit the dying embers. Dante's face transformed. The weariness vanished, replaced by a flash of the predatory violence that had made him the king of Chicago's underworld. He lunged forward, his hand snapping out to catch her by the upper arm. His grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? That was a 50-year-old vintage, and more importantly, it was none of your business. I made it my business the moment your fiancé traded me to you like a piece of livestock." Sophia snapped back, refusing to flinch. She held up her tablet, the screen inches from his face. "Look at this, Dante. Look at the data. I've been logging your symptoms since I arrived. I've been cross-referencing your medication with the Belmont Holdings manifests." Dante tried to pull away, his lip curling in a sneer. "I don't need an accountant to tell me I'm dying. I can feel my own skin failing me." "You aren't dying. You're being harvested." She shook the tablet. "This compound, X4, reacts with the tannins in your scotch. It creates a synthetic necrosis. It mimics organ failure. It's why you feel worse 30 minutes after you take the pill. It's why the marks on your skin are more prominent in the evenings. You aren't rotting, Dante. You're being poisoned by the people you trust most." He went still. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. He looked down at the tablet, his eyes scanning the charts she had meticulously created, the correlation between his intake and his physical decline. He saw the chemical breakdown, the lab notes, and finally, the contract. His grip on her arm loosened, his fingers sliding down to her wrist until he let go entirely. He stared at the third signature on the screen. The name Sao Lorenzo Sao seemed to vibrate with malice. "My brother," he whispered, the words sounding like they were being torn from a throat lined with glass. "He told me Dr. Russell was the only one who could handle this. Rare condition," he lied, Sophia said softly, her anger giving way to a visceral pity. They all lied. Adrian knew. He was the one facilitating the shipments of the catalyst through Belmont Holdings. "He didn't trade me to a dying man to settle a debt, Dante. He traded me to a dead man walking so he could clear his tracks before you were in the ground." Dante's gaze drifted to the amber bottle still clutched in his left hand. He looked at it as if it were a venomous snake. His face was pale, his features sharpened by a sudden, cold clarity. The man who had accepted his end with a cynical grace was gone. In his place was a beast that had just realized it was in a cage. "They thought I was too weak to notice," Dante murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low register. "They thought I would just fade away into the shadows of this house." "They didn't count on me," Sophia said, her voice steady. "They didn't think I was worth noticing. To them, I was just a bird and a girl who was good with numbers and nothing else." "But numbers don't lie, Dante. People do." Dante looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the smudge of ink on her cheek, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the fierce, unyielding intelligence that radiated from her. He looked at the bottle of pills again, his knuckles turning white. "You're sure?" he asked, a final spark of doubt flickering in his eyes. "If I stop taking this, if I stop the liquor, I won't die. The damage to your skin will take time to heal, and your organs will need a detox. But the necrosis will stop," Sophia promised. "You'll be weak for a few days as the toxins leave your system. But you'll be alive." Truly alive. Dante didn't say another word. He raised his arm and flung the medicine bottle against the far wall. It exploded in a spray of plastic and white powder, the pills scattering across the floor like teeth. He stood there, his chest rising and falling in heavy, ragged breaths. "Marco," he roared, the sound echoing through the mansion. A moment later, his head of security burst into the room, gun drawn, eyes darting for a threat. He stopped when he saw Dante standing tall, and Sophia standing beside him, her hand resting tentatively on Dante's forearm. "Boss?" Marco asked, confused. Dante turned to him, a terrifying smile spreading across his face, a smile that promised blood. "Call the private lab. I want a full blood panel. So, and Marco, get me a list of everyone who has touched my medication in the last 6 months." He paused, his eyes cutting to Sophia. "And find out where Lorenzo is. Don't let him know I'm asking." Marco nodded, sensing the shift in the air. The rotting boss was gone. The king was back. As Marco hurried out, Dante turned back to Sophia. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. He stepped into her personal space, his presence overwhelming. He reached out, his thumb brushing the ink stain on her cheek. "You saved my life, Sophia Bennett," he said, his voice a low, vibrating hum. "And you did it by looking at a ledger." "I did it because I hate it when things don't add up," she whispered, her heart racing for an entirely different reason now. Dante leaned in, his face inches from hers. "Adrian Cole has no idea what he's done. He gave me the only thing in this world that could actually save me." He took her hand, his palm warm against hers, and for the first time, he didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who had just found a reason to fight. Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. He picked it up and showed the screen to Sophia. It was a text from Adrian, Sao checking in. "Is the problem still breathing? If so, I'm coming over tonight to help finalize the transition of the Morty assets. See you soon, partner." Sao. Dante looked at Sophia, a predatory glint in his eyes. "It seems your fiancé is coming for a visit. He thinks he's coming to a funeral." Sophia felt a surge of cold, calculating power. She looked at the shattered glass in the fireplace, and then at the man standing before her. "Then let's give him a performance he'll never forget." Dante smirked, his hand tightening on hers. "Oh, we will. But first," he suddenly groaned, his knees buckling. Sophia caught him, his heavy frame leaning into her. The lack of the medicine and the adrenaline was causing a crash. I need to get through the next few hours. I've got you, Sophia said, her voice firm. I've got the data, and I've got you. But as she helped him toward the bed, she realized something. If Adrian was coming tonight, and if Lorenzo was involved, they weren't just coming for the assets. They were coming to ensure Dante never woke up again. The game had just moved from the ledgers to the real world, and the stakes were life and death. She looked at the door, wondering if they were already being watched. If Lorenzo was the third signature, then the traitors weren't just outside the house, they were already inside. The room felt smaller, the air thick with the scent of ozone, and the lingering metallic tang of the spilled medicine. Dante lay back against the pillows, his chest heaving, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if he were trying to see through the very foundation of the Morty Empire. For a man who had spent years preparing for a slow, agonizing death, the sudden injection of hope was more terrifying than the prospect of the grave. Sophia didn't pull away. She sat on the edge of the mattress, her fingers still tracing the line of his jaw, her touch the only thing tethering him to the present. Look at your hands, Dante, she commanded, her voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of his confusion. Don't look at the shadows. Look at the skin. Dante lifted his right hand, the one that had been most severely affected by the dark, bruised patches. He had spent months hiding these marks under leather gloves or the long sleeves of his silk robes, ashamed of the rot he believed was consuming him. But as the moonlight filtered through the heavy velvet curtains, the truth was undeniable. The edges of the dark patches, once jagged and angry, were beginning to soften. The deep, bruised purple was fading into a faint, yellowish gray, the color of a healing injury, not a dying limb. It's not necrosis, Sophia whispered, her eyes shining with a fierce, intellectual triumph. It's a localized subcutaneous reaction. It's designed to look like your tissue is dying from the inside out, but it's superficial. It's a chemical burn, Dante. A slow-release chemical burn delivered through your bloodstream. Dante's voice was a rasp, a ghost of its former power. Dr. Russo has been with my family for 20 years. He delivered my sister's children. He told me it was a rare degenerative condition. He gave me the pills to manage the pain and slow the spread. He gave you the pills to ensure the spread, Sophia countered, reaching for the small, leather-bound notebook she had kept hidden in her sweater pocket. She flipped it open, the pages filled with her neat, precise handwriting, rows of dates, times, and observations that looked more like a corporate audit than a medical journal. I've been tracking it since the second night I was here. Every time you took a dose, your heart rate spiked within 10 minutes. 20 minutes later, the tremors started. By the 30-minute mark, the discoloration on your neck and hands would deepen. But today, you missed the noon dose because we were in the library. And you missed this evening's dose because I knocked it out of your hand. She pointed to the most recent entry. Your breathing is more rhythmic now than it was 4 hours ago. Your eyes aren't bloodshot. The rot isn't winning, Dante. It's retreating because you stopped feeding it. Dante sat up slowly, the movement lacking the brittle, bone-weary stiffness that had characterized his every action for months. He looked at Sophia, really looked at her, seeing past the unfashionable accountant Adrian had discarded. He saw a woman who had used the only weapons she had: logic, observation, and a refusal to accept a lie to dismantle a death sentence. Why? He asked, his voice cracking. Why help me? You were traded to me like a piece of property. You could have just waited for me to die. You would have been free. You could have taken whatever was left in the safe and vanished. Sophia felt a lump in her throat, but she didn't flinch. Because I know what it's like to be told you're worth nothing. I know what it's like to have people look at you and only see a problem to be solved or a debt to be paid. Adrian thought I was too stupid to see his embezzlement. He thought you were too weak to notice his betrayal. I didn't do this just for you, Dante. I did it because I'm tired of the villains winning because they think they're the only ones who are smart. Dante reached out, his hand hovering near her face before he finally let his fingers brush her cheek. Brush her cheek. His skin was warm, truly warm for the first time in a year. You're not an accountant, Sophia. You're a goddamn miracle. The moment of tenderness was shattered by the cold reality of the text message still glowing on the nightstand. Adrian was coming. And he wasn't coming alone. Belmont Holdings, Dante said, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. You said you saw that name in Adrian's ledgers? $2 million, Sophia confirmed. Transferred from your secondary accounts, the ones used for operational maintenance, to a shell company called Belmont Holdings. I traced the registration 3 days ago using the mansion's encrypted server. The CEO is listed as a silent partner, but the secondary signatory is a man named Dr. Julian Russo. Dante's expression transformed. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory stillness that made Sophia realize why the entire city of Chicago feared the name Morty. This was the man who had built an empire, now fueled by the rage of a man who had been brought back from the edge of the grave. The medicine, Dante realized, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Belmont Holdings isn't just a shell for the money. Now fueled by the rage of a man who had been brought back from the edge of a man, they are the distributors for the specialized medication Russo prescribed me. Adrian wasn't just stealing my money. He was using my own money to buy the poison that was killing me. They were splitting the inheritance before I was even in the ground. And Lorenzo? Sophia asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. He's the one who brings you the water with the pills. He's the one who monitors your rest periods. Dante stood up, his tall frame casting a long, intimidating shadow across the room. He didn't stumble. He didn't gasp for air. The fire of betrayal had burned away the last of the chemical lethargy. Lorenzo has been my shadow since I was 18. If he's in on this, then my entire security detail is compromised. The house isn't a fortress anymore, Sophia. It's a cage. He walked over to a heavy oak wardrobe, pulling out a hidden drawer in the base. He pulled out a sleek, black handgun and checked the clip with a practiced, lethal efficiency. Adrian's texts said he's coming tonight to finalize the transition, Sophia reminded him, her mind already spinning through the variables. He thinks you're on your deathbed. He thinks he's coming to claim his prize. Dante turned to her, a dark, wicked smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. It was the look of a man who had just been handed a winning hand in a game he thought he'd lost. Then we shouldn't disappoint him. If he wants a funeral, we'll give him one. But it won't be mine. He stepped closer to her, the heat radiating off his body now a comfort rather than a threat. Sophia, I need you to play a part. Can you be the grieving, terrified woman Adrian expects you to be? Can you look him in the eye and tell him I'm fading fast? Sophia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She thought of the years of Adrian's gaslighting, the way he had mocked her weight, her clothes, and her intelligence while he was plotting to murder a man and discard her like trash. She thought of the way Dante had looked at her in the library not as a plus-sized payment, but as an equal. I spent 4 years playing the part of the perfect, quiet fiancé for that man, Sophia said, her voice hard as diamonds. I can play a grieving widow for one night, especially if it means I get to watch him lose everything. Dante nodded, his eyes glowing with a mixture of respect and something deeper, something that felt dangerously like affection. Good, because if we don't time this perfectly, we won't make it to sunrise. Lorenzo will be checking on me in 10 minutes. When he enters this room, he needs to see a dying man and a broken woman. Suddenly, the faint sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway echoed through the open window. Sophia froze. It was too early. Adrian wasn't supposed to be here for another hour. Dante lunged for the light switch, plunging the room into darkness, leaving only the pale moonlight to illuminate the scene. He moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a rotting man. He climbed back into the bed, pulling the duvet up to his chin, his face instantly reverting to a mask of pale, sweating agony. Get in position, he hissed. Sophia scrambled to the chair beside the bed, knocking over a glass of water to create a sense of frantic disarray. She loosened her hair, letting it fall over her face, and rubbed her eyes until they were red. The heavy oak doors to the master suite creaked open. It wasn't the measured, respectful tap of a maid. It was the heavy, arrogant stride of someone who already owned the place. Is he dead yet? The voice belonged to Adrian. He sounded bored, almost annoyed, as if the process of Dante Morti's death was a tedious chore he was forced to oversee. Sophia let out a choked, convincing sob, burying her face in her hands. From the corner of her eye, she saw a second shadow follow Adrian into the room. It was Lorenzo. He didn't look at Sophia. He went straight to the nightstand, his eyes searching for the amber medicine bottle. When he saw the shattered glass in the fireplace and the spilled liquid, his posture stiffened. "Where is his medication, Sophia?" Lorenzo's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth he had shown her over the past week. I dropped it," Sophia wailed, her voice trembling with a perfect mix of fear and exhaustion. He was shaking so hard. "I tried to give it to him, but he threw it. He's not breathing right, Lorenzo. Please help him." Adrian stepped into the circle of moonlight, a cruel, triumphant smile stretching across his face. He looked at Dante's motionless form on the bed, then at Sophia, cowering in the chair. He reached out and grabbed a handful of her hair, forcing her to look up at him. "Look at you," Adrian sneered, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and victory. "Pathetic until the very end. You really thought you were doing something noble, didn't you? Playing nurse to a corpse." He looked at Lorenzo. "Check him. If he's still twitching, finish it. I want the papers signed by midnight." Lorenzo reached into his jacket, pulling out a silenced pistol. He stepped toward the bed, the barrel aimed directly at Dante's heart. Sophia's breath hitched. Her hand crept toward the heavy brass lamp on the table, her knuckles white. She realized in that moment that she wasn't just playing a part. She was ready to kill for the man in that bed. But as Lorenzo leaned over the dying boss, Dante's eyes snapped open. There was no rot in them, only the cold, lethal fire of a predator who had been waiting in the tall grass. Dante's hand shot out like a viper, gripping Lorenzo's wrist with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for a man supposedly on his deathbed. A sickening crack echoed through the Zim room as Lorenzo's bones gave way under the pressure. The silenced pistol clattered to the carpeted floor with a dull thud. Before Adrian could even register the shift in the air, Dante was upright, his movements fluid and lethal. He wasn't a rotting corpse. He was a predator that had been playing dead, waiting for the vultures to move in for the kill. "You were always a poor judge of character, Adrian." Dante's voice was a low, gravelly rasp, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Adrian stumbled back, his face draining of all color until he was as pale as the sheets Dante had just vacated. "Bolwell. You're supposed to be dead. The doctors said what you paid them to say," Dante growled, stepping out of the bed. He was tall, looming over Adrian like a dark shadow. The dark patches on his skin were still visible. But in the moonlight, they looked less like decay and more like battle scars. Sophia watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the moment of pure, unadulterated terror in Adrian's eyes, the man who had treated her like a disposable asset, now cowering before the monster he thought he had outsmarted. Dante didn't kill them, not yet. He had a larger game to play. With a swift, brutal strike, he incapacitated Lorenzo, then turned his gaze to Adrian. "Get out," Dante commanded. "Run back to your little office and wait. I want you to feel the walls closing in. I want you to wonder every time a car slows down outside your house, if it's me coming to collect the rest of your debt." Adrian didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled out of the room, leaving his fallen accomplice behind. As the sound of his frantic footsteps faded down the hallway, the room plunged into a heavy, ringing silence. Dante didn't move for a long moment. Then his shoulders slumped slightly, and he reached out to steady himself against the bedpost. "Dante," Sophia whispered, rushing to his side. She didn't think. She simply acted, her hands finding his arms to support him. He looked down at her, his eyes searching hers. "You stayed. Why did you stay when you could have let him take you?" "Because he's the real monster, Dante," she said firmly. "And because I don't leave a job half done. We need to know for sure. We need the proof." Within the hour, they were moving. Dante called upon Marco, the only man in his inner circle he still trusted with his life. They didn't use the flashy SUVs or the armored town cars. Instead, They took an old, nondescript sedan from the back of the garage. Sophia sat in the back with a small, sterile cooler containing the samples of the medication she had managed to salvage from the shattered bottle, along with a vial of Dante's blood that Marco had professionally drawn. The drive through the midnight streets of Chicago was surreal. Sophia watched the city lights blur past, thinking of how, only weeks ago, she was worrying about spreadsheets and Adrian's dinner preferences. Now she was a fugitive's accomplice, carrying the key to a mafia boss's survival. They arrived at a small, private pathology lab in the suburbs, owned by a man who owed Dante a life debt. The technician, a gray-haired man named Miller, took the samples without a word, his eyes widening only slightly when he saw the state of Dante's skin. 3 hours, Miller said. That's the fastest I can run the toxicology and the chemical breakdown. We wait, Dante said. They retreated to a small, private library tucked away in the back of the lab's building. It was a dusty, cramped room filled with old medical journals and leather-bound books. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee. Dante sat in a worn armchair, the shadows of the room carving deep hollows into his face. Sophia sat opposite him, the silence between them no longer awkward, but charged with an intense, shared purpose. Why did you do it, Sophia? Dante asked suddenly. He was staring at his hands, where the dark patches seemed to be pulsing in the dim light. I am a man who has built a kingdom on blood and fear. People pray for my death. My own men I treated like brothers, are poisoning me like a stray dog. When a woman like you, someone with a soul, tried to save me. Sophia looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the loneliness he tried so hard to hide behind his reputation. Because you saw me, she said softly. Everyone else saw a plus-sized accountant, a convenient tool, or a prize to be traded. But when I walked into your room, even when you were supposedly rotting, you treated me with more dignity than the man I was supposed to marry. You gave me a choice, Dante. No one ever gives me a choice. Dante let out a short, bitter laugh. A choice to stay in a house of death. Some gift. It was the first time I felt like I owned my own life, she countered. She stood up and walked over to him, kneeling beside his chair. You're not a monster to me, Dante. You're a man who has been betrayed by everyone he trusted. And I know exactly how that feels. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence she had witnessed earlier. They call me the rotting boss. They think I'm decaying from the inside out. You're not rotting, she whispered, leaning into his touch. You're being erased, and I'm not going to let them finish the job. The vulnerability in his eyes at that moment was staggering. For a second, the legendary Dante Morti vanished, replaced by a man who was simply tired of being alone in the dark. He started to say something, his voice thick with emotion, but the door creaked open. Miller walked in, a stack of computer printouts in his hand. His face was grim. You were right to come to me, the technician said, handing the papers to Dante. This isn't a disease. It's a masterpiece of chemical engineering. Sophia leaned in, her analytical mind immediately jumping to the data. What is it? A synthetic compound, Miller explained, pointing to a series of complex molecular chains on the report. It's a derivative of certain chemotherapy drugs, mixed with a rare fungal toxin. In small doses, it mimics the symptoms of systemic organ failure and skin necrosis. It's designed to be slow. It's designed to look like a natural, albeit horrific, decline. If you had taken 2 more doses, Dante, your heart would have simply stopped and any autopsy would have listed the cause as complications from an undiagnosed autoimmune disorder. Dante's grip tightened on the paper until it crinkled. And the distributor? I traced the batch numbers from the liquid in the bottle, Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. The supply chain goes through a series of shell companies, but the primary medical wholesaler is a firm called Belmont Holdings. Sophia felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Belmont Holdings, that's the account I found in Adrian's books. The $2 million transfer. He wasn't just paying a debt, he was buying the poison. Dante stood up, the lethargy of his illness replaced by a cold, calculating rage. He looked at the report, then at Sophia. The truth was no longer a suspicion, it was a weapon. He didn't just trade you to settle a debt, Dante said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm level. He traded you to be the witness to my murder. He wanted you there to tell the world how I rotted away, so no one would ever question the cause of death. He turned to Marco, who was waiting by the door. Marco, get the car. We're going back. Back to the mansion, Sophia asked, her heart racing. But they know you're alive now. They'll be waiting. Dante looked at her, a dark, predatory smirk playing on his lips. No, Sophia, they don't know I'm sound alive. They think I'm a dying man who had one final burst of adrenaline. We're going to give them exactly what they want. We're going to give them a funeral. Sophia realized then what he was planning. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to haunt them. But first, Dante added, stepping closer to her, his presence overwhelming. We need to make sure the world believes I've taken my final breath. And for that, I need you to be the most grieving, broken widow Chicago has ever seen. As they walked out of the lab, the first hints of dawn were breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. Sophia felt a strange sense of calm. The girl who had been traded like a piece of property was gone. In her place stood a woman who was about to help a king reclaim his throne. But as they reached the car, Marco's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his expression turning pale. Boss, we have a problem. The news, it's already out. He turned the screen toward them. A news alert was flashing in bright red letters. Salbi Aria King. Sources report Mafia kingpin Dante Morti has died in his home. Internal power struggle feared. Sao Dante stared at the screen, his eyes narrowing. They're moving faster than I thought. They're not waiting for me to die. They're just telling the world I already have. If the world thinks you're dead, Sophia whispered, then anyone who sees you now will think they're seeing a ghost. Then let's go be a ghost, Dante said, his voice sounding like the closing of a coffin lid. But before we disappear, we have one more stop to make. And Adrian isn't going to like it one bit. The interior of the black SUV was a vacuum of silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the soft patter of rain against the reinforced glass. Mike announced the reinforced glass. Sophia sat huddled in the leather seat, her hands trembling as she stared at the digital lab report on her phone. The numbers didn't just represent chemical compounds and synthetic toxins. They were the blueprints of a murder. Her fiancé, the man she had planned to build a life with, the man she had trusted with her vulnerabilities, hadn't just traded her away to settle a debt. He had sent her into a death trap, intending for her to be a witness to a slow, agonizing execution. Every time she had looked at Dante's darkening skin, every time she had smelled that faint, metallic scent of decay, that was actually a chemical byproduct, Adrian had been counting the days until his problem disappeared. His darkening skin. He knew, Sophia whispered, her voice cracking like dry parchment. He didn't just owe you money, Dante. He was the one supplying the poison through Belmont Holdings. He didn't want to pay the debt. He wanted to inherit the void you'd leave behind. She felt a hot, searing wave of shame wash over her. Not for her actions, but for the years she had spent dimming her own light to fit into the narrow, suffocating box Adrian had built for her. She had been his accountant, his partner, his support system, and all the while, he was a vulture circling a man he hadn't even killed yet. Dante leaned back, the shadows of the passing streetlights dancing across his sharp jawline. The dark patches on his neck were already visibly lighter, his body responding with terrifying efficiency now that the toxic intake had stopped. He looked less like a dying man and more like a god of war preparing for a siege. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering over hers before finally settling on her trembling fingers. His touch was electric warm, steady, and grounding. Look at me, Sophia, he commanded softly. His voice, once a raspy whisper, was regaining its deep, resonant timbre. When she finally met his gaze, she didn't see the monster the world feared. She saw a man who had been betrayed by his own blood and bone, yet still stood tall. Adrian Cole underestimated two things. He underestimated my will to survive, and he vastly underestimated you. You weren't a payment. You were the only thing in that house that was real. You saved my life, Sophia. Do you understand that? While my doctors were paid to kill me and my guards were paid to look away, a woman who was brought here in chains was the only one brave enough to fight for me. Sophia felt a sob catch in her throat, not of sorrow, but of sheer, overwhelming relief. For the first time in her life, someone saw her. Not as a tool, not as a plus-sized burden to be hidden away, but as a savior. The rage that had been simmering in her chest crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. He thinks you're dead, she said, her eyes flashing with a new, dangerous light. The news, they're already celebrating. Let them celebrate, Dante said, his grip on her hand tightening. The higher they climb on their mountain of lies, the longer the fall will be. But I won't have you caught in the crossfire. Once we finish this, you can go anywhere. I'll give you enough to start a dozen lives. Sophia looked at him, really looked at him, the man who had been a ghost, and was now more alive than anyone she had ever known. The space between them seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy with a tension that had nothing to do with the mafia or the poison. It was the raw, primal pull of two souls who had found each other in the dark. I don't want a dozen lives, she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. I want the life I chose. And for the first time, I'm choosing this. She didn't wait for him to move. Sophia leaned forward, closing the gap, and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a soft kiss, it was a collision. It tasted of desperation, of the metallic tang of the city, and of a promise of vengeance. Dante groaned low in his throat, his hand moving from her fingers to the nape of her neck, pulling her closer until there was no air left between them. In his embrace, Sophia felt a power she had never known, a sense of belonging that wasn't based on what she could do for a man, but who she was. The rotting boss was gone. In his place was a king who held her as if she were the most precious jewel in his crown. The car slowed to a crawl, then stopped. Marco cleared his throat, his voice tight with urgency. Boss, we're here, the secondary warehouse near the docks. Adrian's car is already inside. He's meeting with Dr. Russo to finalize the death certificate and the transfer of the Morty assets. KD. Dante broke the kiss, his eyes dark with a hunger that promised both passion and destruction. He wiped a stray tear from Sophia's cheek with his thumb. Stay in the car with Marco, he instructed, his voice dropping an octave into a lethal growl. I need to go handle a ghost's business. Sophia shook her head, her hand flying to the door handle. No, he traded me, Dante. He needs to see exactly what he traded away. He needs to see that I'm not his victim anymore. Dante stared at her for a long beat, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, a slow, terrifyingly beautiful smile spread across his face. He stepped out of the car, the rain slicking his hair back, and held out his hand to her. Then let's go, Sophia. Let's show them what happens when you try to bury a king and his queen before they're dead. As they walked toward the rusting corrugated doors of the warehouse, the sound of Adrian's laughter echoed from within a shop, arrogant sound that cut through the night. Sophia took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs with a newfound strength. She wasn't the girl from the first chapter anymore. She was the woman who was about to watch a world burn, and she was the one holding the match. Dante kicked the small side door open, the heavy steel slamming against the wall like a gunshot. Inside, the light was harsh and flickering, illuminating the shocked faces of the men who thought they had already won. Adrian stood in the center of the room, a glass of expensive scotch in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. He froze, the glass slipping from his fingers and shattering on the concrete floor. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly, translucent gray. Dante, he stammered, his eyes bulging. That's impossible, you're dead, the news said. The news is often wrong, Adrian, Dante said, stepping into the light, his presence filling the cavernous space until the air felt too thin to breathe. But you were right about one thing. He pulled Sophia to his side, his arm heavy and protective around her waist. You did find me a companion for my final days. It's just a shame for you that those days are nowhere near over. Sophia stepped forward, the light catching the defiance in her eyes. She looked at the man she once thought she loved, and felt nothing but a cold, clinical disgust. Did you think I wouldn't check the books, Adrian? She asked, her voice steady and echoing. You forgot that I'm the one who taught you how to hide money. And you forgot that I'm the one who knows exactly where you buried the bodies. Adrian's gaze darted toward the shadows, looking for his hired muscle. But Marco and Dante's men were already moving in, silent as wolves. The trap hadn't just snapped shut, it had crushed him. But as Adrian's eyes landed on the medical bag sitting on the table next to Dr. Russo, a desperate, feral glint appeared in his eyes. He lunged toward the bag, his hand scrambling for something inside. If I'm going down, Adrian screamed, his voice cracking with insanity, I'm taking your queen with me. He pulled a silvered injector from the bag, the needle gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and plunged it toward Sophia's neck.